On the morning of my son's wedding, I sat at the kitchen table with a coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, holding an envelope that contained the deed to 47 acres of farmland in Lancaster County. My boy had asked for nothing. That was the part nobody believed when I told the story afterward. He hadn't asked for a dime, hadn't demanded a venue, hadn't said one ungrateful word in his 31 years on this earth. And still, by the end of that day, I drove home alone with that envelope sealed shut, knowing what I knew and knowing I'd never speak to him the same way again. Before I get into it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one of them, and it helps me know who I'm telling this to. My name's Russell Vinson. I'm 69 years old. I worked 38 years at the Bethlehem Steel Plant outside Allentown, Pennsylvania, until they shut it down in 2003, and then I drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain for another 11 years, until my knees told me it was time to stop. My wife Ruth Ann passed in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from the day they found it to the day she was gone. We were married 42 years. Our boy Connor was the only child God ever gave us. We tried for others. It didn't take. So Connor was everything. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every Little League game in the rain, everything Ruth Ann and I had, we poured into that boy. He grew up to be a good man. That's not a father's bias. Ask anybody in our church. Ask his old teachers. Ask the men he served with overseas. Connor did 2 tours with the Army before he came home and put himself through community college on the GI Bill, then transferred to Penn State and got an engineering degree at 28. He never once asked Ruth Ann or me for help with tuition, even when I begged him to let me chip in. "Dad," he'd say, "you and Mom already gave me the only things that mattered." I tell you that so you understand the kind of son I had. I still have him. That's important to remember as I tell this. The trouble didn't come from him. The trouble came from the woman he was about to marry, and from her family, and from a thing I overheard in a hallway that I was never supposed to hear. Her name was Brielle Coddington. She was 33 when Connor met her, 2 years older than him, and she came from the kind of family that summers in places. Her father, Garrett Coddington, owned a private equity firm in Center City, Philadelphia. Her mother sat on 3 charity boards and had the kind of haircut that costs more than my monthly mortgage payment. They had a place in Bryn Mawr and another one on the Jersey Shore in Avalon. Connor met Brielle at a corporate function up in King of Prussia about 2.5 years before the wedding. She seemed nice enough the first few times she came around. Polite. Asked Ruth Ann about her gardening. Helped me carry plates in from the back porch, the time we had them over for a barbecue before Ruth Ann got sick. But there were tells. There always are, if you're old enough to spot them. The first tell was the way she looked at our house. Not at the house exactly, but past it, like the house was something she was deciding to overlook. We'd lived in that 2-story Cape Cod on a quiet street in Whitehall for 36 years. Ruth Ann had picked the wallpaper in the kitchen herself back in 1987. The screen porch out back was where I taught Connor to throw a curveball. None of that registered with Brielle. To her, it was just a small house in a town she had no reason to ever come back to. The second tell was how she talked about her own father, Garrick. The reverence in her voice. The way she said daddy, like it was a title. I'd never heard a grown woman say daddy that way and mean it like a credential. When Connor was around her family, he got quiet. Not unhappy quiet. Just the quiet of a man who's been raised to listen before he speaks, surrounded by people who'd never been raised that way at all. The third tell came about 11 months before the wedding. Connor came over on a Sunday for dinner, and after he'd helped me clean the gutters, we were sitting on the porch having a beer, and he said, "Dad, Brielle's parents want to pay for the wedding. The whole thing. They've already booked a place." I asked him what kind of place. He looked uncomfortable. "It's a vineyard up in the Brandywine Valley. They have a contract with a planner. It's pretty far along." I said, "Son, that's their right if they want to. I'll help however I can. Did they mention me at all?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Dad, they want me to do the father the groom toast and walk in with you." Of course they did. But the rehearsal dinner, they're handling it. The whole guest list. Everything. I told him that was fine. I meant it at the time. What I didn't know, what Connor didn't know either, was that Garrett Coddington had decided I was a problem to be managed. I learned about it the way a man my age learns most hard things, by accident, in the wrong place at the wrong time, when nobody knew I was listening. It was about 3 months before the wedding. Brielle's mother, Vivienne, had organized what she called a family alignment dinner at a steakhouse in Center City. Connor had asked me to come. I drove down in my old Silverado, parked it 3 blocks away because I didn't want the valet looking at it the way valets look at trucks like mine, and walked the rest. I got there 20 minutes early the way Ruth Ann had always taught me. The hostess told me the Coddington party was already seated at a private table in the back, but that the table wasn't ready yet. Would I mind waiting in the small lounge by the restrooms? I said no, I didn't mind. I was sitting there in a leather chair reading a fishing magazine somebody had left on the table when 2 women came around the corner from the dining room. One of them was Vivienne. The other was her sister, Brielle's aunt, a woman named Honoria who I'd met once. They didn't see me. The chair was tall and angled, and I was behind a fake plant. They stopped right by the corner, maybe 8 feet from where I was sitting, and Vivienne lit into her sister in the kind of low, hot voice that women of that class use when they're trying not to be heard but can't quite manage to lower the volume of what they really feel. He cannot give that toast, Vivienne said. Garrick is firm on it. Absolutely firm. What does Brielle say? Brielle agrees. Of course she agrees. Honoria, the man is going to stand up there in his discount rack blazer and talk about a steel mill in front of the Hartzlers, in front of Whitford. We've spent 2 years getting Connor introduced to the right people. 2 years. What's Garrick going to do? He's going to handle it. Quietly. He's going to tell Connor that Russell needs to step back so the toasts stay focused on the union of the 2 families. He'll find a way to make Russell understand. Garrick is very good at making people understand. Honoria said something I didn't catch. Then Vivienne said the thing that I will carry to my grave. Honoria, please. The man worked in a factory. He drove a delivery truck. Connor has spent his whole adult life trying to escape that, and now we're supposed to put it on display in a tasting barn in front of 300 people? Garrick will offer him something. A quiet seat. A nice mention in the program. We'll figure it out. The boy will go along with it because the boy isn't stupid. He sees what we're offering him. That last sentence is the one that did it. The boy will go along with it because the boy isn't stupid. He sees what we're offering him. They weren't talking about my son, like he was a man getting married to a woman he loved. They were talking about him like he was a transaction that had finally, at 31 years old, agreed to its own terms. The 2 women walked off into the dining room. I sat there in that leather chair holding the fishing magazine, and I will tell you honestly that for about 10 seconds I considered standing up, walking back out to my truck, and driving home. I didn't. I come for my boy. So I went and sat at that dinner, and I smiled when I needed to smile, and I shook Garrick Coddington's hand when he came over, and I made small talk about the Phillies with the man who, I now knew, planned to push me out of my own son's wedding the way you push a stranger's grocery cart out of the way at the supermarket. I drove home that night, and I did not sleep. I lay there next to the empty side of the bed where Ruth Ann used to sleep, and I tried to figure out what to do. Here is what I want you to understand. I am not a vengeful man. I am not the type who yells. I worked in a steel plant for 38 years, and you don't last in a place like that by losing your temper. You last by keeping your head down, doing your job, watching, and remembering. I lay in that bed and I started to remember. I remembered every quiet thing I'd ever set aside for Connor. I remembered the 47 acres of farmland that my own father had left me when he died in 1996, land that I had been quietly leasing to a neighbor named Dale, who grew soybeans and corn on it. Land that had appreciated in value to right around $410,000 at the last appraisal I'd had done. Land that I had told no one, not even Connor, I owned anymore, because Ruth Ann and I had decided years ago we'd hand it to him on a day that mattered. I remembered the savings account at First Northern, $260,000, built up over 4 decades of overtime and skipped vacations. Connor didn't know about that either. Ruth Ann and I had decided when he was 11 years old that we'd never tell him, so he'd grow up knowing how to work, not knowing how to wait. I remembered the deed to a small cabin on a lake up in the Poconos that had belonged to Ruth Ann's father, hers by inheritance, mine by widowhood. probably worth $120,000 on the right day. All of it, every penny of it, every acre, every floorboard of that cabin, all of it had been earmarked in a will Ruth Ann and I had drawn up in 2017 for our son and for any grandchildren he might give us. Connor had no idea. The Coddingtons had no idea. To them, I was a man with a paid-off Cape Cod and a pickup truck. I lay there and I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Garrett Coddington at his own dinner table. I wasn't going to embarrass my son, but I was going to give Connor the wedding gift. His father-in-law and his future mother-in-law and his fiancée had decided I wasn't capable of giving, and I was going to do it in a way they couldn't intercept. I got out of bed at 5 in the morning and I called my old friend Wendell, who'd been a paralegal at a law office in Allentown for 30 years before he retired. I asked him to put me in touch with the best estate attorney he knew. By the next afternoon, I was sitting in the office of a woman named Lorraine Pickerel on the 18th floor of a building in downtown Allentown, telling her what I wanted to do. I had her draft 3 documents. The first was a transfer of the 47 acres of farmland into a trust in Connor's name, with stipulations that the land could not be sold, encumbered, or borrowed against by any spouse or in-law for a period of 15 years from the date of transfer. Belaine looked at me over her glasses when I said that part. She didn't ask. She just wrote it down. The second was a similar trust for the cabin in the Poconos. Same stipulations. Connor's name only. 15-year lockout on any spousal claim. The third was the trickiest. The $260,000 in savings. I had Lorraine structure into an irrevocable trust that would pay out to Connor in monthly installments of $3,000 over a period of 7 years, with a clause that the trust would dissolve and revert entirely to Connor's name in lump sum on the date of his 40th birthday, but only if he was, on that date, still legally married to Brielle Coddington. If he was divorced or separated, the dissolution clause accelerated. The full amount paid out to him immediately, free and clear, no questions asked. Lorraine read that one back to me twice. "Mr. Vincent," she said, "you understand what you're doing here." "I do." "You're betting on a divorce." "No, ma'am. I'm not betting on anything. I'm just making sure that if a certain thing happens, my boy lands on his feet without that family being able to touch what's his. And if it doesn't happen, he gets it the slow way. Either way, he gets it." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I've been doing this work for 31 years, Mr. Vincent. You're not the first father to walk in here with this kind of arrangement. You won't be the last. The clause will hold up." I signed everything that afternoon. I paid her fee in cash from a money order I'd gotten that morning. I drove home, and I put copies of everything in the safe deposit box at the bank, and I put the original deed to the farmland in a manila envelope, and I sealed it. That envelope sat in the top drawer of my dresser for the next 10 weeks, waiting for the wedding day. Now here's the part where I have to tell you about Connor and what happened with him in the weeks leading up to the wedding, because if I don't, the rest of the story won't make sense. Garrick made his move about 6 weeks out. He invited Connor to lunch at his club in Philadelphia. Connor told me about it that same night. He came over to the house and he sat at the kitchen table, where Ruth Ann used to roll out pie crusts, and he said, "Dad, Garrick wanted to talk about the wedding. He had some ideas about the toasts." I asked him what kind of ideas. Connor wouldn't look at me. "He thinks it might be smoother if you did give a long toast. He suggested maybe just a short blessing at the rehearsal dinner instead. He said the reception is going to have a lot of his clients there, and he wants the energy to be," he used the word uniform. He said it would be easier on you too, less pressure. I watched my son's face while he said that. I watched him try to make it sound reasonable, the way a good man tries to make a bad arrangement sound reasonable when he's been put in a position where he can't see another way out. And I knew, sitting there at that kitchen table, that the boy had been told something by Garrick that he wasn't telling me. Maybe it was a job offer at the firm. Maybe it was a down payment on a house in Wayne. Maybe it was just the soft, steady pressure of a man like Garrick saying son in that voice they use, the voice that makes a 31-year-old engineer from Whitehall, Pennsylvania, feel for the first time in his life like he's standing in a room he might actually belong in. I didn't blame Connor. I will never blame Connor for that. The boy was being courted, the way they court boys like him, and he didn't have the tools yet to see it for what it was. I'd been the one who hadn't given him those tools. That was on me. I told him, Son, if that's what your future father-in-law wants, that's fine with me. I'll keep my remarks to the rehearsal. He looked relieved. He hugged me. He said, Dad, you're the best. And then he went back to his apartment, and I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ruth Ann's sister Marcy called me. She lives in Reading. She'd gotten her invitation in the mail. She said, Russ, I need to ask you something. Are you sure about the schedule? I said, what schedule? She said, the invitation says the ceremony is at 4. But Maureen, you remember Maureen? My friend from the choir? Her son is in Connor's wedding party. He told her the rehearsal is at 4 and the actual ceremony is at 2. Did they change it on you? I held that phone for a long time. I thanked Marcy. I hung up. I walked into the living room. I sat down in Ruth Ann's chair, and I will tell you honestly, that was the only time during all this that I cried. Not for me, for Ruth Ann, because she had carried that boy for 9 months and labored 31 hours to bring him into the world, and somebody had decided that the man who had stood beside her through all of that didn't deserve to see his only son say his vows. I checked my own invitation. It said 4 o'clock. I called the wedding planner's office under a fake name, pretending to be a vendor confirming a delivery time, and the receptionist confirmed the ceremony started at 2. The reception at 4. I want you to understand what that meant. They had printed 2 sets of invitations. One set, for me and for whoever else they wanted, absent from the actual vows, said the ceremony was at 4, which was when the reception started. By the time we showed up, we'd be walking into a cocktail hour. We'd have missed the whole thing. Connor would already be married. Garrick would already have walked Brielle down the aisle. And whatever happened during that ceremony, whatever role I might have had, whatever moment I might have shared with my boy, that would have already happened, and we would never get it back. I did not call Connor. I did not call Brielle. I did not call Garrick. I sat with that information for 3 days, and I made a plan. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. The vineyard was about an hour and 20 minutes from my house, up in the Brandywine Valley. I got up at 6 in the morning. I put on the suit I'd worn to Ruth Ann's funeral, because it was the only good suit I owned, and because I wanted her with me that day, in whatever way I could manage. I put the manila envelope in the inside breast pocket. I left the house at noon. I drove the speed limit. I got there at 1:15. The vineyard was beautiful. I'll give them that. Old stone, climbing roses, a long gravel lane lined with oaks just starting to turn. I parked in the back of the lot where my truck wouldn't embarrass anyone. I walked up to the ceremony site, which was an outdoor pavilion behind the main building. There were already maybe 30 people seated. Wedding party in a small room off to the side. I could see Connor through the open door in his tuxedo talking to his best man. He saw me. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Confusion. And then, and this is the thing that told me everything I needed to know, relief. The boy thought I wasn't coming. The boy had been told, somehow, by someone, that I decided to skip the ceremony. And he'd believed it because the invitation said 4, and because he'd been so busy in the run-up to the wedding that he'd never sat down and double-checked with his own father what time I'd be arriving. He came across the room to me. He grabbed both my arms. Dad, you're here. You're here. His eyes were wet. I said, of course I'm here, son. I told you I'd be here. He hugged me hard. I felt him shaking just a little. That was when I knew that whatever Garrick had told him about me, whatever lie had been planted between the rehearsal and the wedding day, Connor had been worried about me, now relieved to be rid of me. The boy still loved his father. The boy had just been navigating something he wasn't equipped to navigate. I told him, Connor, I want you to listen to me. Whatever your father-in-law tells you about me today, whatever Brielle's mother says about me, you remember this hug right now. You remember your father showed up. You remember I came. Will you remember that? He said, Dad, what are you talking about? I said, just remember it. The ceremony was beautiful. I sat in the 3rd row on the groom's side, where Ruth Ann should have been sitting next to me. Connor said his vows. I watched my boy promise himself to a woman whose family had spent the better part of 2 years quietly trying to delete me from his life, and I watched him do it with his whole heart, because that's the kind of man he is. He doesn't see the trap until he's standing in it. Some men are like that. I love them anyway. The reception was in the tasting barn. 300 people. White linens. A string quartet, then a band. Vivian in a dress that probably cost $6,000. Garrick working the room like the floor of a stock exchange. Brielle radiant, glowing. Every photograph already framed in her head before the photographer even raised the camera. And Connor. Connor kept looking for me. He'd find me at my table, way in the back, and he'd give me this little nod. Like, I see you, Dad. I see you. About 90 minutes in, after the dinner, but before the dancing really got going, I walked up to the head table. Garrick saw me coming. His face tightened. I could see him calculating. I just smiled at him, gave him a nod, and walked past him to where Connor was sitting. I leaned down. I put my hand on my boy's shoulder. I said, "Son, I have a wedding gift for you. From your mother and me. I'd like to give it to you privately. Now, if you have a minute." Connor stood up immediately. "Of course, Dad." Brielle started to stand up too. I said very gently, "Brielle, sweetheart, this is between Connor and his father. Just for a moment, I'll bring him right back." She didn't like that. I saw her glance at her own father across the table. Garrick gave a small, almost invisible shake of his head. "Don't make a scene." She sat back down. I walked Connor outside to a small bench under one of the oaks at the edge of the lawn, away from the noise. The sun was setting behind the hills. I took the manila envelope out of my breast pocket, and I handed it to him. "Open it." He opened it. He read the first page. He stopped. He read it again. He looked up at me. "Dad, what is this?" "That's the deed to your grandfather's farm. 47 acres in Lancaster County. It's yours now. There's also a trust for the cabin up at the lake, and there's an account that pays you $3,000 a month for the next 7 years, with the rest coming to you on your 40th birthday, a little over $400,000 altogether. Before the monthly money, about $690,000 if you add it all up over time. I will never, as long as I live, forget the look on my son's face. He said, Dad, I didn't. I never. I said, I know you didn't ask. I know you didn't ask. I know. That's why." He started to cry, right there on the bench in his tuxedo. My 31-year-old son, who'd been to war, crying like a child. I said, "Son, I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'm going to leave, and you're going to go back inside, and you're going to dance with your wife, and you're going to be happy, because that's what your mother would want, and that's what I want. But I need you to hear this one thing, and I need you to remember it for the rest of your life." He nodded. He couldn't speak. I said, "There's a clause in that trust. The big one, the 400. If you and Brielle stay married until you turn 40, the money pays out the slow way, $3,000 a month, like a wage. But if for any reason that marriage ends before then, and son, I am not saying it will, I am not predicting anything, I am just telling you what's in the paperwork. If that marriage ends, the entire balance pays out to you that day. Free and clear. None of it can be touched by any spouse, any in-law, any lawyer hired by anybody but you. The land is the same way. The cabin is the same way. 15 years, none of it can be borrowed against or sold by anyone but you. I had a lawyer in Allentown set it all up. Her name's on the cover sheet if you ever need to call her." He looked at me. The crying had stopped. He looked at me, the way a son looks at a father when he's just realized for the first time in his life that the man he thought he knew is actually a different man entirely and a more dangerous one. He said, very quietly, "Dad, what did you hear?" And I knew, right then, that he'd already suspected, that somewhere in the back of his mind, in the parts of him that had been quiet around the Coddingtons, in the places where he'd told himself he was imagining things, he'd known. I said, "I heard your mother-in-law 3 months ago, in a hallway at a steakhouse, telling her sister that you would go along with whatever they offered you because you weren't stupid. I heard her say I was a man in a discount rack blazer who'd embarrass you in front of her friends. I heard her say her husband was going to make me understand. And then I went to that dinner and I shook your father-in-law's hand, son, and I smiled, because I wanted to see what they were going to do. I looked at my watch. A little while later, your Aunt Marcy called me. She'd noticed the invitations were printed wrong. The one sent to me said 4 o'clock. The real ceremony was at 2. I would have missed your vows entirely. Somebody made sure of it. I don't know if it was your fiancée or her mother or her father or all three. I don't need to know. But I want you to understand what it means, son, that they tried to keep me from seeing you get married. Connor's face had gone gray. I said, I'm not telling you this to ruin your day. I'm telling you because in 10 years, if everything's fine, if Brielle is the woman you think she is, and her family treats you the way you deserve to be treated, then the money pays out the slow way and nobody ever has to know any of this happened. You and I will laugh about it. But if it isn't fine, son, if somewhere down the line you find yourself cornered in a marriage where they're trying to manage you the way they tried to manage me, I want you to know that your father saw it coming. And your father made sure that on the day you needed to walk away, you could walk away. I stood up. I'm going home now, son. Don't follow me. Don't make a scene. Go back in there and dance with your wife. Be a gentleman. Be the man your mother raised. The paperwork is already filed. The trusts are already real. You don't need to do anything tonight except enjoy your wedding. He stood up too. He hugged me. He hugged me harder than he'd ever hugged me in his life. He said into my shoulder, Dad, I am so sorry. I said don't be sorry. I said don't be sorry. Just remember. I walked across that lawn, past the lit-up tasting barn full of 300 people who didn't know my name and didn't care to, past the valets in their black vests, out to my old Silverado in the back of the parking lot. I got in. I drove home in the dark. I didn't cry. Ruth Ann was with me the whole way. I want to tell you what happened after, because I know you want to know. Connor went back inside that night. He danced with his wife. He gave the speech he'd prepared. He smiled in every photograph. Garrett Coddington never knew, that night or any night after, what had passed between my son and me on that bench. Brielle didn't know either. Connor went on his honeymoon. He came back. He started the new job that, yes, it turned out Garrick had arranged for him at a consulting firm in Center City. 2 years and 4 months later, on a Tuesday in February, Connor showed up at my door at 7 in the evening with a small suitcase. He had filed for divorce that morning. He didn't tell me what had happened in the marriage, and I didn't ask. He stayed in his old room for 6 weeks. Then he found an apartment in Bethlehem, closer to me. The trust dissolved on the date the divorce was finalized. Connor walked away with everything his mother and I had ever worked for, free and clear, and not a single Coddington lawyer ever got within 100 miles of it. He's 36 now. He's seeing a nice woman who teaches 3rd grade in the Parkland district. Her name is Margaret. She comes to Sunday dinners. She brought a peach cobbler the first time, and I knew within 20 minutes she was a different kind of woman. I haven't told him that yet. I will eventually. Connor never asked me how I knew to put that clause in the trust. He never asked how I'd seen it coming. He just kissed the top of my head one night, about a year after the divorce, when we were watching a Phillies game on the porch, and he said, Dad, thank you for hearing them in that hallway. I said, You're welcome, son. We never spoke about it again. If you've been listening this whole time, I want you to take one thing with you. Wedding gifts aren't always money. Sometimes the gift you give your child on their wedding day is the quiet, careful thing you set up in advance, in a lawyer's office in a city they've never been to, on a piece of paper they don't read, for 10 years. Sometimes the gift is the door you build into the wall behind them, the door they don't know is there, the door they only find on the night they need it. That's the gift Ruth Ann and I gave our boy. That's the gift my own father, who left me 47 acres of dirt and a name worth carrying, gave me. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button, leave a comment, and tell me about your own father. I read every one of them. Stay well. Take care of your people. I'll see you in the next one. I've spent the better part of 2 years thinking about that night on the bench under the oak tree, and I've come to believe that what happened to my family didn't happen by accident. Things rarely do. Every choice somebody makes, every quiet decision in a hallway at a steakhouse, every invitation printed wrong on purpose, every nod between a husband and a wife about how to manage a man they've decided is beneath them, all of it sets something in motion. Cause and effect. The Coddingtons made their choices long before I made mine. They built the trap. I just made sure my boy had a key in his pocket when he walked into it. Here's what I want any father listening to this to take with him. There are 3 things a man my age is supposed to leave behind, and money isn't really one of them, even though I've talked a lot about money in this story. The first thing is your character. The second is your judgment. The third is your willingness to keep going when somebody tries to put you in a corner. Connor watched me do all 3 of those things at his wedding, even when he didn't know that was what he was watching. The boy learned more in those 2 minutes on the bench than I'd been able to teach him in 31 years of Sunday dinners. I think about Ruth Ann every day. I think about what she would have said if she'd been alive to sit in that hallway and hear what Vivian said about me. She would have wanted me to walk straight into that dining room and turn over a table. That was Ruth Ann. She had a temper, but Ruth Ann also raised me, in her quiet way, over 42 years of marriage, to understand that the best answers a man gives to people who underestimate him are answers they don't see coming. You don't argue with people like the Coddingtons. You outlast them. You set up the paperwork. You sign the documents. You wait. If I had marched into that dinner 3 months before the wedding and confronted Garrick, he would have used it. He would have told Connor I was unstable, embarrassing, a man who couldn't be in polite company. The wedding would have happened anyway. The trap would have closed anyway. And Connor, when his marriage ended 2 years later, would have walked away with nothing. Because everything he and Brielle owned would have been wrapped up in her family's lawyers and her family's accountants and her family's quiet, suffocating generosity. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is a manila envelope in a dresser drawer for 10 weeks. Sometimes wisdom is sitting in a leather chair behind a fake plant and listening, even when what you're hearing is breaking something inside you. And sometimes character is shaking the hand of a man you know is plotting against your only son, because you understand that the best way to protect what you love is to make sure the people who want to hurt it never see you coming. Connor's 36 now. He's free. That's all I ever wanted.